Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, my name is Willem Ledeboer. I'm the Deputy Director of the Netherlands Institute at Athens, which at itself is already a very wonderful position to have. And one of the most fun parts of it is to be able to represent the director of the Institute when he or she is not in Athens and being able to welcome you personally. And tonight, it's not only something that brings me joy, but I'm also a bit nervous because of the fact that tonight, for the first time, I am representing a new director of the Institute, who is Jan-Paul Krielaert. So on his behalf, a very warm welcome to all of you. The second reason for being a bit nervous is the fact that tonight, for the first time, I am allowed to introduce a TEXNH-Lecture to you. Yeah. Actually, it's already the 19th TEXNH-Lecture, which is a very strong component of the program of the Netherlands Institute at Athens. And the third reason, and the main reason that I'm slightly nervous tonight, is the fact that the person who is responsible for adding this TEXNH branch to our NIA tree is former director of the Netherlands Institute at Athens, Anne Briesbaert. And because of the fact that up till now, for the last couple of years, when I had to welcome you on behalf of the director, I had to do so on behalf of Anne Briesbaert. She never was there, able to see whether I did a good job or not. So I feel like I'm being scrutinized by the current director, by all directors through Anne's eyes tonight. So once again, it's a real pleasure to welcome you here. And directors come and go. And it's even better to see when they return, to keep on supporting the Institute through their work, even through the new position that they have at, in Anne's case, the University of Leuven. And it's my great pleasure and a privilege to ask Anne to properly introduce tonight's TEXNH-Lecture, TEXNH event, I should say. Thank you very much all for being here.
Sorry to cause confusion, and maybe also sorry causing confusion with the introduction of the introduction for the introduction. Willem, thank you so much for this warm welcome to everybody in the room here, to everybody online. It's a real pleasure to be here again in a different situation, but not really, because I see so many familiar faces and I'm really happy to be here with everybody in the room and online. I will keep the introduction as short as possible because we actually have 4 speakers and a discussant. The person who will present the actual lecture is Dr. Nikolas Papadimitriou, and he's the director of the Paul and Alexandra Canellopoulos Museum in Athens. And I think you probably all know him. His research focuses on the Aegean Bronze Age, the archaeology of Athens and Attica, ancient technologies and cultural interactions in the Mediterranean. He has studied at universities of Athens and Birmingham, and worked as a curator at the Museum of Cycladic Arts in Athens and at the Department of Antiquities in Cyprus between 2003 and 17, so quite a chunk of your life, I didn't realize, Nico. And he was also a lecturer at the Heidelberg Institute of Classical Studies between 2018 and 21. Currently, he's co-directing the research and publication programs at the prehistoric sites of Thorikos and Marathon in Attica and at Kato Samikon in Elis. Next to an amazing publication record, and it keeps on coming, he also has received research fellowships from the Princeton and Harvard Centers for Hellenic Studies. Welcome, Nico. I continue. Akis Goumas is a contemporary jeweler maker and researcher of ancient crafting technologies. Aki, welcome again. Next to studies in economics, he trained as a jeweler and silversmith and studied gemology and seal graving in Greece and in Germany. Since 2000, he has been teaching creative jewelry at the Chalkis School of Art, since 2017 at Anama Jewelry School in Athens, and the Alchimia Contemporary Jewelry School in Florence. Since 2006, he's a member of an interdisciplinary group of researchers who study ancient goldworking and seal engraving techniques. And I understand that this is Nikos and Eleni and several other people. In 21, he was a visiting artist at the Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies, and in 24, he received the prestigious Homo Faber Fellowship, established by the Jaeger LeCoultre and Michelangelo Foundation for Creativity and Craftsmanship. In 24-25, he co-organized the exhibition Art in Gold, Jewelry in Hellenistic Times at the Benaki Museum, and I assume pretty much everybody in this room has seen that exhibition. It was a fabulous event. Dr. Eleni Konstantinidi-Syvridi is curator at the Department of Prehistoric, Egyptian, Cypriot, and Near Eastern collections of antiquities at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, and a very dear friend. She studied at Ioannina University and received her PhD at Birmingham University in the UK. Her research focus on the late Bronze Age Aegean and the East Mediterranean, with a special interest in Mycenaean jewelry and dress. She has given seminars and lectures on the history and technology of Mycenaean jewelry in Greece and abroad, and has written extensively on various late Bronze Age issues. For the past decade, she has been co-directing a multidisciplinary project, as I mentioned before, for the reconstruction of ancient goldworking techniques, which she is currently studying at the corpus of metal signet rings housed in the Mycenaean collection of the National Archaeological Museum. And so many different aspects of that multidisciplinary project has already come out, and I think we will see more of that today. And Maria Kontaki studied at the Department of Conservation of Antiquities and Works of Art in the School of Graphic Arts and Artistic Studies, majoring in conservation of excavated material and architecture. And I think Maria is with us online today. Since 2000, she has been working at the National Archaeological Museum as a conservator, both in the labs of Egyptian antiquities and from 2003 in the Metals Conservation Laboratory, specializing in its prehistoric collection. Her scientific interest lies in the manufacturing technology of metals and organic antiquities of the late Bronze Age, as well as the use of design and photogrammetric programs for the modeling of antiquities and mounting supports. She has participated in the European Conservation Programme of the Sacro Monte in Osuccio, in Como in Italy, in conservation programs of excavation finds in ancient Messenia and ancient Eliki, and in many research projects. She has participated also in conferences and has contributed to publications, and she is one of the most wonderful people to work with also in the National Museum in Athens, as I experienced the last few days. These are the speakers for today. A nice club and a very interesting group of people, and we will hear soon very much more on that. But I should also introduce our discussant for today. Dr. Rachel Phillips is both art historian and archaeologist. She specializes in the material culture of late Bronze Age Greece. Currently, she holds the Leventis Fellowship at Hellenic Studies at the British School in Athens. She received her PhD in classics from the University of Cambridge, where she also completed her BA and MPhil degrees. Her doctoral thesis examined the curation of early Mycenaean tomb assemblages in the Peloponnese, with a focus on the relations between bodies and objects, and her research, more generally, examines the material and visual culture of late Bronze Age Greece, with a particular focus on the early Mycenaean mortuary sphere. While holding the fellowship, Rachel is working on a book project she just told me about the intersection of art, death, and ritual action in early Greece, looking at the aesthetic expressions of ritual depositions across the late Bronze Age and early Iron Ages. Rachel has plenty of fieldwork experience in Greece and in Italy, notably from Pylos and Palekastro in East Crete. She also works on 2 archival projects in which she works on the written correspondence between Arthur Evans and Alan Weiss, very interesting topic, and a second project dealing with the experience of women at the British School between 1890 and 1920, with a focus on the intersection of class and gender. And I imagine, Rachel, that the conferences that are regularly organized in Athens are very useful for you in that sense, and you probably contributed to those as well. So I think we have a very good match here between Rachel and the group of people that will present today. So, Nico, I will leave the floor to you now. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, provided I will manage to arrange my paper and change my glasses. Okay, so it's a great pleasure to be here tonight, and I would like to thank the organizers of the TEXNH seminar, which has been a fantastic meeting place for those interested in technology, economy, and society. I would like to thank especially Anne Brisbert for the invitation for all the work, and as well to welcome the new director, Paul Krillot, and wish him the best. Also thanks to Dr. Rachel Phillips for being the discussant of our presentation. And apologize to the audience for this very long introduction, but I have to say that nothing of what you will see tonight wouldn't be possible if we were not this kind of team. Not only archaeologists, not only Akis Goumas, who is an expert craftsman and expert artist, but also the conservators. Their contribution to any kind of research is great. So throughout history, should I move these to here? Probably yes. So throughout history, crafts and artistic creation have been represented in two ways. As a collective activity, with emphasis being laid on, teamwork and the cooperation among different members of a workshop, here images dating from Old Kingdom Egypt to medieval Europe, or as an individual activity, where emphasis is on focused attention and the skillful management of the tools by the artisan. Here again, images ranging from second millennium Egypt to 20th century Europe and India. This interplay between the collective and the individual, or else the workshop and the lone artist, reflects a constant feature of craft production. Workshops are small communities where artisans spend much of their lives, from the time when they learn a craft as apprentices to the time when they become masters and have their own crews and perhaps their workshops. Artisans work a lot with other people, their teachers, other craftsmen, their apprentices, their providers of materials, their clients. But they also spend hours working alone. This is the time of contemplation, practice, trial and error, and creativity. In a recent paper with Akis Goumas, we suggested that workshops with a complex network of affiliations and dependencies are responsible for the creation of artistic traditions. In other words, that no tradition can be created outside of the workshop, while craft innovation should be attributed to the agency of individuals who break from these traditions. Workshops have attracted much attention in archaeology, either as physical spaces where humans, materials, and tools interact in sophisticated ways, often blending different crafts, or as communities of practice. The latter concept was developed in the 1990s by scholars in education to explain how people acquire and reproduce tacit or implicit knowledge, that is, practical skills and experience-based know-how associated with the active engagement of the body, as, for example, playing music, doing sports, or making things. This notion has been extremely helpful for understanding the process of apprenticeship in past societies. In Aegean archaeology, craft workshops have been explored by several scholars, among which I would like to mention here Ifigenia Tournavitou, Leticia Fialon, Anne Brisbert, and Natasha Dacoury-Hill, because they have focused particularly on Mycenaean examples. Tournavitou and Fialon have dealt with the physical characteristics, the archaeological correlates of working spaces, and how we can identify them on the field. Brisbert has focused on internal organization, highlighting the active role of the artisans and the interaction among different technical lineages, or chaîne opératoire. And Dacoury-Hill has focused on the multisensory dimension of craft creation. All these approaches are extremely important. They touch upon different aspects of craft production and organization. Yet inevitably, they focus on the later part of the Late Bronze Age. That is Late Hellenic III, in which architectural remains of workshops do not abound, but they do exist. The Early Mycenaean period is a different archaeological universe. Here, not only workshop remains are lacking, but even evidence of habitation space is extremely rare. With a notable exception of pottery kilns, which turn out in considerable numbers in recent years, crafting installations of that period are extremely rare in mainland Greece. So no specialized pottery, tools, waste material, or other criteria for identifying such spaces are available. Or if they are, because we do find them occasionally in tombs, they're out of context. On the other hand, we have a plethora of exceptionally made objects deposited in tombs. Inevitably, to understand craft production in this period, scholars have turned to the study of individual objects. From the time of Georg Caro to Stephanie Alsebrook in the recent times, many archaeologists have made huge contributions to our understanding of early Mycenaean craft technology. Our team has been working in this line of research since 2010, trying to combine archaeology with modern archaeometric methods of analysis, and what is more important, with experimental reconstruction of techniques based on microscopic observation and analytical results. In that, we follow a tradition that was introduced by Ernisa Kelariou and Katie Dimakopoulou while working in the National Archaeological Museum. In this paper, we will focus on weapons. That was not something we had planned. Our main interest was in gold jewelry, but the material drove us to a different direction when we realized that goldsmithing techniques were widely applied on early Mycenaean weaponry. This was the first indication of what is quite fancifully called cross-craft interaction in social anthropology and archaeology, but can be more simply described as creative cooperation among artisans or workshops specializing in different fields and materials. Cross-craft interaction in the Aegean has been explored systematically by Anne and other colleagues like Stephanie Alsebrook and Nancy Thomas. As always, our approach will be a technical one. We will examine what technical observations and tool traces on objects can tell us about the cooperation among artisans. Then, we will explore how these observations affect our understanding of craft organization in early Mycenaean times and the chain of production from acquisition of materials to manufacture to the distribution of finished objects. But why weapons? Is it only because we study them, or do they have a wider value for early Mycenaean art? Let us see briefly an outline of technical developments in the early Mycenaean times. As we all know, Mycenaean crafts made a very abrupt appearance in the later part of Middle Helladic III and in Late Helladic I, the 17th and 16th century, in the grave circles of Mycenae and the earliest Messenian tholoi. With the exception of pottery, which had been systematically produced throughout the Middle Bronze Age, and metalware, which was rare but still present, all other crafts were introduced in mainland Greece at that time. We may find bits and pieces of earlier artifacts, but the truth is that there was no established crafting tradition for the kind of gold, silver, bronze, ivory, seal engraving and stoneworking seen in these new contexts. Reasonably, this artistic explosion has been attributed to incoming artists from Crete and other regions for early Mycenaeans who were not subject exclusively to Minoan influence. As Oliver Dickinson, Robert Laffineur, Ellen Davis and other scholars have demonstrated, among others, the basic industries that developed in the earliest phases of the Soft Grave period were related to metals, the making of weapons, metal vessels, and ornaments. Ivory working was another industry that developed locally, including the production of relief plaques, mirrors, combs, etc. But as Jean-Claude Poussard has shown, it developed very slowly. The types that were produced systematically from the very beginning that is from the time of grave circle B, were pommels and hilt plates for swords and daggers. Other groups like stone vessels and seals, vitreous materials and other exotica were mostly imported at the beginning and only started being produced at a later stage in late Hellenic too. So weapons were not only systematically produced from the beginning of the Mycenaean era, they were also a field of experimentation and innovation where artists combined a variety of materials and techniques. This was particularly so for swords and daggers, probably because they were commonly used for ceremonial purposes or as status symbols. Now, swords and daggers consist of three parts: the blade, the hilt, and the pommel. The hilt is always covered with an organic material, wood and ivory, to make the grip easier, and sometimes decorated with gold. The organic part was riveted on the shoulder of the weapon and concealed the tongue, that is the metallic part of the hilt, which in the earliest example was too short, as you can see here and in this X-ray of the sword we saw earlier, and only in type B and mainly in type C swords, the tongue was enlarged so as to reach the area of the pommel. The making of swords and daggers involved the forging of the blade, which was first cast in roughly rhomboid form and then hammered into the final shape, as shown in this photo by Haris Tselios. This was a process that required extremely high skills, especially since the blades of some type A swords were almost 1 meter long. When needed, the decoration of the blade with incisions, motifs raised in relief, a technique that has not been sufficiently studied, and different types of inlays, either solid, as in the left example, or as individual figures, as in the right example. The making and decoration of the hilt with a variety of techniques we'll see later. The making and decoration of the pommel. Here you can see the famous sword of a griffin warrior at Pylos, which you will have the opportunity to see in a few weeks in the National Archaeological Museum when the Pylos exhibition will open. And finally, the assembling of the various parts with rivets and other connecting devices. We will focus on the decoration of handles, which presents the greatest variety of materials and techniques and provides ample evidence of interaction among different artists. Sorry. Okay, that's a chronological chart. We do not need to discuss this now. Now, the earliest and most common way of decorating a handle was with gold sheathing, so with a sheet of gold that was wrapped around the hilt and then decorated by incision or with other more complex techniques. Here you see microscopic views of an incised leaf, gold leaf, from the front and from the back. And here you can see one example of a leaf that has been raised with higher relief, and you can see also some failures. But a bit later, in late Hellenic I, in grave circle A, another technique appeared, which involved the creation of circular or spiral motifs with these kind of tiny L-shaped gold bars, gold elements. You can see that they are less than 1 millimeter in height and less than 1 millimeter in length, which were placed one after the other in order to create these motifs. And this was applied on the organic material, on the ivory. Okay, different ways of applying this technique existed, with a single line on the left, with a double line on the middle, with a triple line on the right. And thanks to the conservators, we have managed to identify many more examples which are very much corroded with X-rays. not only in complete objects, but even in spare rivets, as you can see in these images. So there may be many more examples than we know. Now, this technique, according to what we know now, was used only at Mycenae in late Hellenic I in the 17th century, let's say, and in the next century it spread in other places like Kakovatos and Pylos in western Greece and Vaphio in Laconia. In Mycenae it is not attested in this period, but this may have to do with the fact that late Hellenic IIa contexts are really absent from Mycenae because the Tholos tombs have been heavily planted. Now, slightly later, so because this was a technique that continued to be used, a slightly different version appeared. Here you see a destroyed or semi-destroyed sword from the Tholos tomb at Dendra, which preserves these type C swords. They had these hilt plates made of ivory. And now what is preserved is this part of the decoration, which seen from a close distance looks like a gold sheet, apart from the lower part, which has these elements that, if seen from the side, they have the same shape as before. Now, in a spare part, detached part that there was in this excavation by expert person, if one sees from the underside, it is obvious that this consisted of many of these gold bars placed one next to the other. Actually, the excavators found almost 5,000 of these gold bars in the Tholos tomb, because, of course, the organic material has disintegrated and the gold bars fell apart. In the nearby chamber tomb 12, which is what we know as the Curious tomb, a similar sword was deposited, or must have been deposited. This is an association made by Paul Ostrom, because this sword is now in the National Museum of Denmark, and Ostrom believes that it is an object that was planted from this tomb before the actual excavation. Now, this is interesting because the pommel is decorated with thousands, almost 2,000 of these gold bars. Here is the underside of the ivory pommel, and here is the upper part. And this is interesting because here you can see these neatly organized lines of small, tiny holes. These are holes which are less than 0.5 millimeter wide, where the gold bars, the nails of the gold bars were placed. And here from a microscopic view, how they look like when they were very well placed next to another and engraved. The same type of technique has been used for the famous sword of the Griffin warrior tomb in Pylos, which, as we said, we'll see in a few weeks, and is certainly the best preserved example and the only example that has a figured representation in this part. Now, the shape and the size of gold bars in this second version, evolved, if you want, version of this technique, are much more homogeneous in style. They are longer, they are 2 to 4 millimeters, and the height of the nail is 0.7 to 1.5 millimeter. This technique appears mostly in the late Hellenic II to 3A1 period, and it appears in the Argolid, but in chamber tombs mostly, and in the Tholos of Dendra, but in chamber tombs in Mycenae and Prosimna, so less wealthy tombs than in the previous period, and in the Griffin warrior tomb in Pylos. Altogether, the gold embroidery technique has this kind of distribution, with most examples coming from Mycenae, and only 1 or 2 from other sides, all these are sites that were very, very important in the early Mycenaean period. Some of them declined later, like Kakovatos. The interesting thing is that we have only 20 objects, 20 plus objects of this technique, covering 2, perhaps 3 centuries. This is extremely demanding technique, and you can ask later, Akis, and you will see in a while in a video. It's extremely difficult technique to work. So there is a question there: how was knowledge maintained and transmitted, and how did the technique evolve if it was used for so rarely? Because these objects appear only in the early period. They appear only in the tombs of very, very high-ranking officials. Now, another surprise was the composition of the gold. When we analyzed the gold, we found, and you can see this in red frames, that almost pure gold was used there, 98 to 99%. This is not native gold. There is no native gold of that, or it is extremely rare to find native gold of this composition. On the other hand, refinement of gold is something that starts much, much later. So there is a question there how this material was enriched, actually how they managed to remove additional elements like silver and copper. But in any case, we see that they have the technique of doing this as well, not only the metalworking technique, but also the technique of refining the gold material. Now, here we can see a reconstruction that was made by Akis Goumas based on all the elements, all the evidence of the shop floor. So he's using pure gold and first cutting small stripes of gold, which he puts under fire in order to become soft, in order to start creating this kind of wires that will eventually turn into the L-shaped gold bars. Because they're not tight enough, he has to roll them between 2 hard surfaces, and these make them proper tight wire. And then with a small chisel, he starts cutting the long wire into smaller pieces that will be used. And from now on, everything is under microscope. And here you can understand the size of this tiny piece. Then with the tweezers, all the tools here are made by Akis, okay, so they are custom made. This could not be made with market tools. So when he produces quite a lot of them, he has produced, he takes a piece of bone here, we cannot use ivory, and he applies some organic glue on the surface, and glue is necessary in order to keep these things in place. And then with a pointed tool, he starts opening a series of holes, and then with a tweezer, he places the nails, the gold bars in the holes. That was very difficult because these, the tails of these gold bars, they tend to move. They are not, they're a bit knotty. So it was difficult to keep them in place. And here you can see the scale of things, how small this is. It was impossible to see them. Sometimes, you know, they're like mosquitoes. You cannot see them all the time. Most of the time, you cannot see them. And when he managed to place a lot of them in the wood, he started polishing them with a bronze graver. And while polishing them, he realized that they started amalgamating them. So the seams were not visible anymore, which explains why they look like gold sheet. And when this was done, he started doing the engraving. So for this piece, which is, you know, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, or something like that, it took us something like 3 years to reach the result. But anyway, it's a very, very time-consuming technique, this is what I wanted to say. So coming to the cooperation, it is clearly obvious that in order to create this kind of Griffin warrior sword, you need at least 3 people: a specialist bronzesmith that will produce the blade, a specialist goldsmith who will do this. This cannot be an occasional goldsmith. That's a master goldsmith who is doing this. And of course, an ivory carver, because not everybody can cut the ivory. I mean, that's another specialization. Now, while looking at these examples, we found a dagger that had a single gold bar there. But this dagger was not any dagger. Actually, in this, you can see here the L-shaped thing. That dagger was not any dagger. It was the lion hand dagger, which means that the 2 techniques combined. And that gave the impetus for this discussion, how all these techniques can be applied on the same object. These objects are very well known and very well studied, mainly for the technique of inlaying. Okay, and here you can see the silver and gold inlays, how well they're placed in this material. And there is a lot of discussion about the artists. Nancy Thomas has suggested that these 2 objects are from the same hand, while others are from different hands, all found in the same grave circle A. Other scholars like Robert Laffiner believe that this is a matter of, that's a different period, that's a matter of time, that in the period throughout time, this technique deteriorates rather than improving. But this is not something that is of our concern now. The other discussion is about the black material in which these inlays are placed. And here you can see the stratigraphy of these elements with a tin bronze at the bottom. Okay, that's the blade. And the black bronze, as we call it. And we know that's a black bronze because Katie Makopoulou and colleagues in the National Museum made analysis in the 90s. And they found that this is a patinated copper alloy that includes elements of gold and silver. Now, we should remember also that these daggers, they had a handle, and here is the ivory piece, how the ivory piece would cover the shoulder of the dagger. And now the interesting thing is that the trace of this hill plate is still there, and you can see the edge. And if you see from a closer contact, you'll see that this hill plate has destroyed actually the inlay, which tell us that we have 2 different people here. It's impossible that the same person made such a huge mistake. It needs days and days in order to make the inlays. Then you don't go to put the other plate on it. Okay, so these are 2 different people doing this kind of thing. And so if we put all persons who worked here, we have bronzesmiths, we have a goldsmith, we have a wood ivory carver, we have at least 3 people working on that. And we try to reconstruct the scène opératoire of this very demanding object, at least the basic stages, starting from the casting of the blade. And the casting of the blade had to be made with this cavity, with a cavity where the patinated copper would be inserted. And then in this patina, the black bronze, the patinated copper, the artist had to do the engraving of the figures that would be then inserted. Then he had to cut the inlays out of gold or silver and then place them. All these are stages, of course, that need more and more experimental work. But we have to start making the storyboard in order to start working. And then there is another master who is doing this work, the cutting and the drilling of the ivory hill plate, and joining the riveting after he has destroyed the work of the previous master. And then somebody else, the goldsmith coming, he's not very happy, or she is not very happy with the destruction of the inlay, so he has the gold embroidery on top in order to show that he's good enough. And as time passed, we managed to find other examples of this coexistence, and this is something that is unknown. We have never published this, and this is another dagger from Rucci, dating to slightly later, late Hellenic to A in Messenia. And in this weapon, in this dagger, in this protruding piece of the gold cover, you can see here that there is this line of things on the one side, and on the other side there are holes. But also there are things that get inside the holes. And if you see this from the side, it looks very much like gold embroidery. And in fact, it is gold embroidery. It's the same kind of thing. And here, the technician, the artisan is using this for a practical purpose, not for a decorative purpose. And that's the first time we encountered this. Up to now, it was used for decorative purposes alone. So we do have here again a coexistence of two decorative scènes opératoires, because the blade itself is made in the same way. Okay, so we don't have different technical lineages there. We have differences in the decorative lineage. And we have another example from a chamber tomb in Mycenae, which is made again with the same technique. Okay, it has a wooden hilt, and it's decorated with gold embroidery, and you can see here how it is made. And it has this cavity. Now, you cannot see it very well, but there is this cavity. And Professor Thanasis Papadopoulos believes that this was also an inlaid dagger. That this is the cavity where the black bronze was inside. I mean, we cannot prove this thing. But given that Professor Papadopoulos has published all inlaid daggers, we trust his opinion. So we saw earlier the distribution of gold embroidery, which is made from the 17th to 15th century and has a very similar distribution with the inlaid decoration, which is of course not strange if they were made on the same daggers. They seem to be made or have Mycenae as center, major center of production, and then being distributed from there in other places. We should be careful here because we saw how many things came out from Pylos in the past 10 years, and we may still find more, or from Anthea, so we may still see many, many surprises from Messenia. Now, the provenance of gold inlay is thought generally to be from the Eastern Mediterranean, either from Middle Kingdom Egypt or from the Levant of the same period, the Middle Kingdom, and here you see examples. But there are also equally early examples of a kind of damascening, as they call it in Europe, from Switzerland and from France. And we'll see why we go that far, because the gold embroidery has no parallels in Crete or in the Eastern Mediterranean, at least so far. And the only parallels we have come from England and France, Brittany. Here you can see only an image of a dagger in Bouche-Barreau and a dagger and a weapon in Dendra, how similar they look in profile. And although this is a very, very, very distant place, it is the area where from Amber was coming in Mycenaean Greece in the beginning of the Late Bronze Age, so some kind of connection is not impossible. Next, we move to another very, very strange object, very unique object. It is a dagger, it's a long dagger or a very short sword that has a decoration consisting of gold in cloisonné technique, with inlays in gold, lapis lazuli, rock crystal, etc. And this was found in this condition. This is how Caro illustrates the pieces. It is interesting because the inlays were in place. If you see the image here over the 294, the inlays are still in place, so they were not restored. And here we can see close photos where you can see how the lapis inlays consisted of leaf-shaped pieces and cross-shaped pieces for the center. And here you can see also the rock crystal inlays. And it is interesting because if you see from the side, you can see how sharp the rock crystal is cut. So you can imagine how much effort you have to give, not to cut it, but to be sure that it will remain in place. So for details, you can ask Akis. In the shoulder, there are even smaller cells with these gold pieces, so these pieces of lapis lazuli, which are placed in the edge. They're not placed in a layer of black bronze, but the edges of these eagle-shaped faces, they had some kind of inlays, which Caro describes as being the same as the lion hand dagger, so probably of the same alloy, this black bronze that was used here for decorative purposes. Now, in order to understand how these pieces, how many different techniques were involved, we should think of how these things were cut. Now, lapis lazuli needed a kind of grinding in order to be cut. The same with rock crystal. And here is a photo from another experiment we do with Akis Goumas on seal engraving. So these kind of rotating devices do exist in the Aegean. There's no doubt about that. And then there is all the placing of these in the gold cells. Now, there is a question, since there is nothing similar. We do have cloisonné examples in jewelry, but there is nothing like that in weaponry, again, in the Aegean. So why this is not an imported piece? It can be. But the shape itself, the shape of the handle, the shape of the blade, is Aegean. So it is either something that had been ordered in this shape from abroad, or it is something that was made somewhere in the Aegean by somebody who was trained in this kind of techniques. Now, again, here we have the same breakdown of many different materials, and at least 4 specialists. A lapidary is added here. And so here are other examples of cloisonné, later examples in the Aegean. Here, one of the things that you will see in this new exhibition, a cloisonné bead from the Levant that dates to the late 1. So this was the technique that was used in the Levant, as it was also in Egypt, already from the Middle Kingdom. So it is possible that it comes from this part of the world. Now, the presence of foreign artisans in early Mycenaean or early Mycenaean sites should not surprise us. We know from texts, Near Eastern texts, that artisans were mobile, or they were sent from one ruler to another, from one court to another. And in a Lina B tablet from Pylos, there is a chrysourgos, there is a gold working mentioned with the term anuva before that, and this may be an ethnic name, perhaps of a foreigner, and perhaps not of one foreigner. Now, the other interesting thing here is the provenance of the materials there. Lapis and tin may come from Afghanistan, although tin lately seems, I mean, with late researches by Ernst Pernitschka and other colleagues, seems to come also from Britain in this time. Copper from Cyprus, ivory from Egypt or the Levant, gold from Egypt or from Thrace, the Balkans, silver from Attica. And then in later times, we have a quite different thing. When when such beautiful things start being deposited in chamber tombs in the 15th century, we have this very beautiful handle, which is made of faience, and you can see the details on that, which are very much like the details of this handle found in a nearby chamber tomb, which is made of a kind of material which is a kind of alabaster. It has not been identified precisely. It is not agate as it was believed in the past. It is a soft material which has the composition of a kind of alabaster. In the same tomb, this gold embroidered dagger was found. And of course, they imitate, both of them, they imitate the swords or the daggers with this kind of gold leaf decoration that we find in 15th century tombs with these elements here on the neck. So what we have in this period is artists trying not to work all together, but to imitate one kind of design in different materials. And this may sound boring, but it is not, because the techniques involved in this case are completely different. So for gypsum alabaster, or calcite alabaster as the material that our conservator believes that this dagger is made of, this handle is made of, is worked with these kind of rotating tools. Okay? Faience is made with a completely different technique, which is similar to clay techniques, clay working techniques. And of course, gold working is something completely different. So it's extremely difficult to reach the same results with such different techniques. And again, here, coexistences that we have in these tombs. Now, the idea of making similar things is something which is common in the Eastern Mediterranean in the Late Bronze Age anyway. Okay. And we do have patterns that are repeated in different materials. That's the most famous example, now with the Griffin warrior, but with combat agate. But in this period, in the 15th century, which is directly after the collapse of Minoan economies and the influx of artisans in Mycenaean Greece, we start having direct copies in different materials. We start having people imitating the same things in different materials. Okay. And later in the 14th and 13th century, we'll have the introduction of the glass material in which people start reproducing gold or silver jewelry. So, to conclude, the beginning of the Mycenaean era is a time of a very abrupt change. And we have the sudden rise of exquisite art, which has no formative stage. It comes finished. It is exquisite, and it is at the same time heterogeneous. So we have highly skilled artisans who work together, probably in the same workshops, because we cannot imagine that a finished blade would go to another workshop and then from that workshop would go to another workshop. So we do believe that they work in the same workshops. Some of them may be from Crete, but others must be from the Eastern Mediterranean, and some may even be from Europe or the Balkans. One, of course, wonders what may have brought these people from the cosmopolitan environment of urban Knossos and Ugarit, with its palaces, bazaars, ceremonial celebrations, parades, to a dull provincial site like Mycenae or Pylos, which by that time had little more than impressive tombs, and where the only entertainment was probably hunting. I may exaggerate here, but I do this on purpose. I remember that several years ago, Malcolm Winner suggested the Versailles effect to explain the impact, the Minoan influence in Cycladic and mainland art. Malcolm himself reconsidered later and recognized also the slightly colonial aspect of this theory. But what we wanted to say here is that the Versailles effect is not wrong. The problem is that it doesn't give at all agency to those who receive these influences. We believe that in the Mycenaean, the early Mycenaean world, in Mycenae itself and perhaps in Pylos, we have a slightly different situation where there are elites who are actively trying to collect everything from all over the world. And they do spend a lot of money in the sense that they provide a lot of material to them. Robert Lafineur has noted that there is a clear difference between the prolific finds from Mycenae and those from contemporaneous Minoan Crete that exhibit an obvious opposite trend to economize on gold. But Minoan Crete is a palatial society by that time. They don't necessarily invest in this kind of art. So I would like to replace the Versailles effect theory with a Dubai effect theory. That is the case of elites who, for whatever reason, become excessively rich at the end of the Middle Bronze Age and start first collecting the most extravagant precious artifacts from all over the world, and then attracting artists from various places to work at their service. Like in today Dubai, that was a way to make an impression on the local scale and at the same time become known in the international scene. For that reason, the elites, they had to offer excessive freedom and wealth to the invitees. Gathering master artisans, it was something that produced all this art and who cooperated actively, was also something that led to innovation because there were no specific traditions, strong traditions that had to be followed. Each one brought his or her own package with them. And they were all very highly skilled artisans. And they collaborated, but they also competed. And they had to compete because they had to present all these things to their patrons. And so this heterogeneity created this kind of innovation that we see in the early Mycenaean period only. When we go into the 15th century, when we go into the late Helladic to B3A1 period, which is the period that Keti Dimakopoulou had suggested that it's the real period of minoanization of mainland art, most probably because there was an influx of artisans who came from Crete after the collapse of Minoan economies. Mycenaean art, mainland art, starts becoming homogeneous. So we start having real, obvious, identifiable traditions. And this leads to standardization. If you have workshops with strong tradition, it is very difficult to change something. And this standardization creates what we call koine, which is what we see in the 14th and the 15th century. But now, and I finish with that, inspiration was lost and artistic emulation was expressed through the effort to imitate the same forms in different materials. But meanwhile, the elites had chosen to invest in different realms, grandiose architecture, ceremoniality, and trade. It was the time of the palaces, which led us to another archaeological universe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Amazing. Thank you so much to you and to your co-authors for this incredibly rich presentation and for showing us so many amazing photos of the objects as well. I think it's so important, especially in the early Mycenaean period where we don't have evidence for workshops, to kind of exactly as you said, to start from the objects themselves, to start from this detailed microscopic view and then kind of build up each step of that production process to understand just how sophisticated, how complex these objects and these craftspeople were. Maybe before we open the floor to questions, I can ask you to elaborate or expand on how you understand the role of the early Mycenaean elites in these production processes, the extent, I suppose, that you think they were kind of actively commissioning objects or requesting certain techniques, certain images, as opposed to the craftspeople themselves kind of being the real drivers of innovation.
Yeah. I think that the process of having very rich and inspired people who want to emulate something that exists elsewhere, culturally emulate, I mean, is quite common in history. I really think of all the tyrants in southern Italy and Sicily. If we think of Philip II, Macedonia, if we think of Evagoras in Salamis, they did exactly the same in a way. The difference is that we have written evidence for them. We have sources. So they attracted all kinds of intellectuals from all over the world. They attracted artists, they attracted philosophers, they attracted everybody. Now, in some of these places, there was a much stronger local tradition. And so when, you know, all the new artists came from southern Greece or in Macedonia, etc., they incorporated the early tradition into the new creations, but they made completely new creations. What you see in Pella in the late 4th century has nothing to do with Macedonia before that. Okay, and the same could be said for all the Hellenistic world. So it is not actually that strange to see this happening. People who want to, they have the economic means to do this. Now, how they have the economic means, I don't know, and I wouldn't get into that discussion. So the experience from these cases say that yes, they do ask for specific things. It's not just come here and usually these are, you know, people with great egos. I mean, later historical evidence suggests that these kind of people, like the tyrants, like Philip, like all this, you know, they were people with huge personality. So they directed the creation. They said what they wanted. But of course, there is a level of freedom there. So I think that when we go into the National Museum and we see what exists in the Mycenaean area of the graves and clay, you don't believe the quality of art that is there. It is overwhelming. It's so overwhelming that you don't want to see more. I mean, it's too much, really. And it is, you know, like going in a museum of modern art in somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula now, that there is so much which is collected. I suppose it would be the same if you went in the States at the beginning of the 20th century. Okay. So yeah, I think that there is political role. I mean, there is role of the political elites or economic elites or however we call them in how these things, in the direction that these things will take. Well, that's my opinion. I don't know if everybody agrees with that because we're many.
Let me bring you the microphone.
I totally agree. We have discussed it for hours anyway, so we know each other's opinion, especially when craftsmen start to produce the same motifs in various media. It is very obvious that there is an elite patronage, because craftsmen obviously do not lack skill or inventiveness. So it's obvious that they follow a pattern book, let's say, with some motives that they have to put in every material. It is the very period that all elite burials share some common features. Same vessels, silver or gold, same weapons, same ivories, all the elite burials have the similar types of offerings, and we see that especially in the Tholos tombs that were not, of course, plundered. Yes, so I totally agree. Yeah.
Thank you both. If we open the floor to questions now, I think Anne.
Would you like to?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nico, Eleni, Aki, Maria, for a wonderful talk. I enjoyed every single moment of it, and I think I was about to get cramps from writing stuff down. I have a question that to me almost feels like a contradiction, but perhaps not even. I think, Nico, at some point you were talking about the fact that the artisans have the freedom to experiment, and they do clearly, in producing these very, very high status symbols. And my question is, how is that not a very risky situation, especially from the viewpoint of the patron who pays for the business, to put it down in very blunt, practical things? But then maybe that's not the case or the issue, since he or she has plenty of resources anyway to cover it. So what is your view on that? And do we have any evidence of, you showed in the beginning the mistake with the haft, of course, so that's clearly something that they were experimenting with and at the same time managed to cover it up. Did you come across other forms of experimentation that didn't quite work out and may have been a reason for rejecting certain items? Or, and it's more than one question, of course, but.
No, I understand what you say. I have to ask the colleagues. We have certainly come across many cases of mistakes during the process. And one of the interesting things that I think is better if Akis answers this is that for a master artisan, it's really very difficult to make such a huge mistake. This is the first time I asked a sculptor, what happens if you do this stronger than, and you take a big part? Okay, it's impossible, we don't do it. I mean, we know how to do it. We can fix the mistake, and we can see these kind of things, and that would be a fantastic lecture by itself. I cannot think of any experimental pieces of that period. Probably those who failed didn't survive too. But yeah, I understand what you say, but I think that there is something in there are two things in the gold embroidery which we have dealt so much that, you know, if you deal with something so much, you get a bit preoccupied with it. But anyway, first of all, this is something that it was not obvious to everybody. As you saw, it looks like being covered in gold foil when it is very well done. So very few people would know that this is done in this technique. Now, were the commissioners knowledgeable of that? I don't know. I mean, it's impossible. I would like to believe, I mean, it's as intricate and complex as the Fabergé eggs. I mean, did they know? Yes, they did. So the people who ordered them, they knew how difficult it was to make.
Imagine they did know, because it took so much longer to do than just to use gold sheet, for example.
So they may look different, but they knew what they asked for. So yeah, I suppose there were failures and there were it must have been risky in this kind of situation. Things are risky sometimes. That's why they were so good. This is what we were discussing. We were doing the experiments. We're discussing this, that if you were Mycenaean and you didn't do this well, probably you didn't live to go to the next stage. Okay, Aki, please.
I mean, and in a way, if they were so perfect in what they were doing, then the Mycenaeans definitely knew who they were getting in their house to do the job. It was not just a choice, it was the person.
In the beginning, yeah, it is interesting here, one word only, to see how not all techniques improve. As Robert Laffina has said, the inlay is deteriorated as technique. So what he suggests is that the initial craftsman came from Syria or something like that were master craftsmen, and they learned it, but they didn't learn to do it so well. So it's a different thing.
But to learn this technique almost about 3 years. Practice.
Μιλάω κοντά γιατί είμαι ακούς τώρα τέτοιο. Yeah.
And I'm still working on it. And I think that the artist he tried to imitate a flat surface of metal, which he can follow the form of the handle, which he can't succeed it with just a very thin leaf. And the other thing is that what I believe and what I see when I work is that when you go to so small details, so small scales, you are living in another planet. So you don't have the feeling of the time, of the space. You don't need to eat or drink or just. Maybe they have the same feeling. This is why you need the hours and days and nights to do it. Sometimes if you see it closer, maybe you can see the differences of the rhythm of making. It means that they're working in a different time. But he's a good teacher.
I suppose with gold sheet, if it imitates gold sheet, but it kind of has a more perfect surface, almost, you don't have the kind of folding or crumpling you might get.
The result is totally different because now you have a flat surface which covers, and when you have a gold sheet, you have to, with repoussé or printing on a mold, you have different results. And also something which we can't see is that the people who make the molds, so it's another, also other artists or artisans who make the molds. Also in the daggers, the alchemist who makes the alloy, because the alloy is very rare. It's a modern sakudo in Japan, and in order to make it, he adds the 5%, 3 to 5% of gold, in order not to let the copper to oxidize silver and gold and push it to go out. This is very, very clever. So you don't just think it. You have to take it from somewhere. And also how to give the color, to make it black. You have to boil it with the vegetables, with the... so this is a knowledge which not only 3, more people than this work.
We have several questions online. So the first one from Christina Kolb is, are there any examples of gold embroidery used on objects beside weapons?
Not so far as we know. It was reserved for weapons, and that was very surprising when we started studying this. But it is a technique that needs an underlying material. It is a technique that is applied to something else. So you need an organic material to apply it.
The next question from Kathy Hall is, I wonder if you saw any evidence of reuse of pommels and hilt plates. Are they ever moved between weapons?
Of reuse? Reuse of the same hilt or the same pommel.
So are they moved is the same pommel or the same hilt plate moved between weapons?
Have we? Not that I can remember, but I don't think it is impossible. I mean, there is also the idea has been expressed that these were proper weapons that were transformed into ceremonial weapons for the burial, right? So that the handle was applied into the, I don't know if this is possible, but it has been suggested that the handle was made and it was applied to a plate that otherwise had been used for weapons. I don't really believe, if you want my opinion, because if you see the analysis of the daggers, of the inlaid daggers, the proper bronze is 94% copper, which is extremely soft for any other purpose than showing off. But I believe that it could be possible to reuse, yes, but I cannot recall it. Eleni.
We don't have sufficient evidence to say something like that. It could be possible, but one of the examples we've seen shows something.
But so you think they were made for ceremonial purposes in life and then deposited with the dead?
Some of them, yes. Some of them were certainly made for ceremonial purposes. Now, if all of them were...
Yeah. Okay, does anyone in the room have questions? Yes, Hannah.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful and amazing images. Actually, I cheekily have two questions, if that's okay. The first is, was there ever any evidence of the small gold rods being attached, like drilled into either the wood or the ivory directly, or was it going into a glue layer, like in the experimental? But maybe it would have eroded away.
There is some evidence in one piece from the pommel that is in Copenhagen, which we can see because we're here. Yeah, you can see green. You can see here a greenish material that there is. Yeah, this seems like a kind of softish material which has been oxidized, and so perhaps this is why it has been preserved. Because if it was a glue, it should have disintegrated. And it was our idea that we should suggest that this piece should be analyzed. And there is another piece of the same pommel at Nafplion, or at least Ostrom believes that they come from the same, because it was excavated in the same tomb, which also preserve the same kind of greenish material. And this greenish material, it has also the imprint of a nail. So it's a negative nail. And this is something that we may ask to be analyzed because it's completely destroyed. So it is not something that can be restored or otherwise. It is impossible to keep them without glue because they move just like that.
Okay.
They can be all around,
Thank you. That's so interesting. And the other question I had was whether you were talking about the different kind of grades of gold that we used, and is there any patterns between the types of actual decoration and the type of gold, or is it across the board?
I understand what you say. We didn't find different grades of gold in gold embroidery. They were all, 99% or 98%. What you describe is attested in the British and French examples. So they use different colored gold in different lines. They have lines they don't have L-shaped things. They have just nails, tiny, and they have lines with different color, more yellowish, more reddish, etc. So they certainly explored the color, and generally, most of what we see here was made in order to create polychromy also. So all these things that we saw created a kind of polychromy that was really pleasing for the early Mycenaeans and for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. How would they have organized the lane? The project, please. Thank you.
When I tried to learn the technique, we made many trials, and because in order to fill all the surface, you have to change angles, and so you have to find ways to solve his problems. So he has to make empty spaces, and then he has to add some more nails. But what I want to say before that this technique works only if you have pure gold, in order to push the metal, and because when you put the nails, you have space between the nails. So you have to push the metal to expand from one another. Use first layer of a glue, you put them, and then you use a second layer of a glue in order to push them and keep them in space. Otherwise, you can't work it. But it's very difficult to organize it because you have to have in mind the thickness of the wire, which is 0.25 to 0.3, the thickness of the wire, and you have to make the needle of the drill at the same size, and then also you have to change the edge, because when you cut this small nail, you make it flat. You have to change it, make it in point, and then to put inside. So it has a lot of work behind what you see.
Akis, here we just have for those. Here we have what Akis is describing. Yeah.
He leaves empty space, so he has to cover them with other.
We have to explain that Akis worked with magnifying glasses throughout the experiment.
Yes.
So it's surprising that nobody has asked it if the. It's surprising that nobody has asked yet if there was child labor in Mycenaean times, because probably there was, yeah.
My question was
Akis said that you need very good sight as well, very fine fingers.
Very young to do it.
Hi, thank you so much. That was fascinating, and those videos were so cool. I just wanted to ask, I think you made a distinction between the gold embroidery being decorative and then practical. At what point is it practical? I mean, it sounds so like it requires so much skill and technique. Why would it be practical? Why would they need to use that?
In the sense that it was not made to create, either to decorate. They had two ways. Okay, either they made spirals with that, or they were covering the whole surface and then they would make spirals with incision. In the place where I showed you, it was just used to fix the protruding gold element into the place. So it didn't really, sorry, now we have to move quite a few of them, but it didn't have any role in the decorative. It's here. It is these are the L-shaped things. Okay, and that, sorry, this is where this part is. So I don't think that anybody could see that. It was just, now, why to use such a difficult technique instead of putting a proper nail? I don't know.
I suppose it still has some kind of visual effect, though.
Probably.
Or if you're the craft person who's been staring at these gold bars for hours, you'd notice that small line that's missing.
Or you're so obsessed with that you apply it everywhere.
Okay. We have some questions online from John Komitsas. I think you've answered some of them already, but one of them is whether there are time estimations for the full construction.
Where are they?
Whether you can estimate the time it would take for the full construction of these objects.
Because
Akis, στο μικρόφωνο γιατί σε μιλάμε εκεί.
I tried to make something after all these years. I tried to work again with a different way of looking at the technique. And in order to make a square centimeter, takes me to prepare the metal, to prepare the nails, and to prepare the solder and push it. It takes about more than 1 hour. That's to organize it and do everything.
And I suppose
It's not pure gold, it's pure silver, but the way is almost the same. And with modern tools. Yeah. But I want to bring this technique now.
So it would certainly be something that needed some months to be finished. And
Also maybe something, you need a break. You can't work continuously to do this, and you need a break. And because when you put your eyes up, you close.
But it is interesting also, if you allow me, Aki, that throughout these years that we're working in this, the more you work on that scale, the more you see also. So we saw things in the third year of study that we couldn't see the first. And the problem with the publication is that in the last month, Maria was calling from the museum and said, I found another one. Stop finding, please. Because we had different vision level, yeah.
Realized, especially in gold embroidery, these bars are hidden behind corrosion. So, more samples you see, the more your eye gets used to it, and you know where to look for.
I have another sort of conflicting thing that bothers me. On the one hand, we need an absolute master artisan. On the other hand, we need somebody with very good eyes and very tiny fingers. So I understand this potentially as a bit of an age conflict here, but maybe I'm wrong. Are we talking about a specialist artisan that is at the age of 16 at the top of his game?
60 or 16?
16.
I think yes. I think that the parallel I can think is with seal engraving, gem engraving, the paper by Dimitris Planchos, who discussed that is the seal engraver who died as a master in 18 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
So he must have started working at 6. But here is Akis, who can tell us the real practice in traditional workshops.
You need to be very young to do it. Because also you need...
How young are you to start, let's say? How young are people when they start with this kind of...
If they start at the age of 7, at the age of 15, 16, and if you have the right imagination, you're not a normal technician. You have to have something more. And this we understand with this technique. They had something more, because they could do it with a flat, thin gold, but they had to invent something else. So this is very, very new. And they have to have very thin fingers, also to touch them, to roll them, and you must have a different feeling, which for me, it's very, very different. This is why I have many differences when I work with it. But if you are young, when I was started, our daughter was 16. For her, it was very easy to play with these very thin wires and make them and attach. So this is something interesting. And also the other thing is that they are not engraved. If you see the tunnels, they are chiseled, all the lines. And there you can see a very, very steady rhythm, which is very, very important. Yeah. So it's not only the golden embroidery, also it's...
Yes, very steady hand.
I add something. For the later period, the palatial one, we have evidence from linear B tablets that children were among the personnel of the palace from 5 years old even. Well, we know that from fingertips, but of course we don't know what they worked on. We have evidence that children with their mothers worked for the palace in various tasks, yes.
And in gold, workshops, in these kind of workshops, usually they started from the very early doing things in stages. So when they're very young, they learn how to do wires, or when they get older, they learn how to beat gold or things like that. So when they reach 10, they don't remember how they learn. It's like learning how to speak. You don't remember how you learned it.
Can I ask about the kind of transition into the palatial period? Because so gold embroidery and metal inlay, you don't get those techniques after LH3A1.
No.
And I was wondering why you think that kind of those techniques disappear rather than become part of this more standardized coining.
It's a completely different reality. Centralized system is probably more interested in exporting oil and textiles rather than producing masterpieces. This is why during the Palatial period, art is so standardized. We see the same shapes, bead, for example, papyrus, lily, rosettes for about 3 centuries, 2.5. I think it's a completely different, they have a completely different goal. The palatial system produces.
Or they're not deposited in tombs anymore, because if they had this kind of things, they never deposited in tombs, we don't find them. So, because we do have art in the sense of great painting, frescoes by that time, but it's a different way of investing, of elite investing, let's say, than we have in early periods.
Yeah, and maybe Eleni, your answer kind of points back to the funerary context of these objects as well. That's no longer kind of the main sphere of investment later on.
It's a world that is controlled to an extent from a central authority. So decisions are made by other people with other goals.
We have a follow-up question online, which is our last question of today. So John Komitsas again asks, so this is following up from your answer about it taking a few months to create these objects. And the question is, does this have any implications for whether the weapon was kind of ready-made for burial? Let me read more. If some months were required for the finished product, is this pointing to an already existing object before the burial?
I think that the way these people perceived, the burial in shaft grave 4, for example, needed the production of 3 gold masks, 55 type A swords, and things. So there was some delay in the burial. But anyway, I think that for all these things, there are things that are made on the spot, not on the spot, but just for funeral display. For the swords, Katie Harrell has said that they were made at an earlier time. They were used and they were returned. Okay, these are weapons that may have been really ceremonial, really for parades, really for presenting yourself, and then deposited in tombs. They're not necessarily be made for the burial itself. We don't have any other context from these periods, rather than we have only burial, so it's impossible to say anything about. But and they needed to destroy wealth in this period. But you don't only destroy wealth, you also use it.
Yeah, and not all objects have to be kind of made at the same time or before their deposition. Okay, well, I was just going to say thank you. Just thank you to Nikolas for answering so many questions, and to Eleni and Akis as well.